Born from the real-world needs of Resolve Marine, the Resolve Maritime Academy offers unmatched training for maritime or marine, firefighting, safety, and resource management. Our courses are taught by active professionals, providing hands-on experience that goes beyond industry standards. Whether you need STCW, USCG, or MCA certification, Resolve Academy will prepare you to mitigate emergencies, saving property and lives. Training as real as it gets, with real-world scenarios and live-action simulations. Push your limits, bring out your inner hero, and become an indispensable member of your team. Resolve Maritime Academy, where real-world training meets real-life expertise.
Laura DiBella, welcome back.
Happy to be back.
I'm happy to have you back. This is great. This is great. We had a conversation, last August, I think it published 1st of September, and so good to see you again.
It's really great to see you. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Well, no, it's great. It's great. This is so fun. You know, it's kind of cool to circle back around. So much has happened since last September. And I'm going to, just for the benefit of those that haven't met you in my previous podcast, do just a quick introduction. So, Laura, you were the first female Secretary of Commerce turned government affairs advisor now with Adams and Reese. This was under the DeSantis administration, right? And tied into Enterprise Florida. You were also president and CEO of Enterprise Florida for a period of time. Unfortunately, that program's ended.
It did.
That's a shame. Because my company utilized some of the benefits of Enterprise Florida, and I thought it was a wonderful leg up for Florida-based companies. It was a good program.
Right. On a positive note, they've just transferred into the new economic model, which is the fully government Department of Commerce. So they're not gone completely.
All right.
But yeah, they just changed shape. So,
all right.
Yeah.
There you go. Shapeshifters. Good stuff. Yeah. You were also the executive director of the Florida Harbor Pilots Association.
Yes.
First female to hold that position?
Correct. And first executive director ever.
Period.
So,
wow.
Yes.
Yeah. And, that's a really, if you know what you know around here, that's a really essential set of services that bringing ships in and out of all of our ports probably goes under the radar in most places. Few people really understand the role the harbor pilots play in getting commerce in and out.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
That's really cool. And you were the port director, Port of Fernandina, right?
Cool. Little port, Northeast Florida, one of the little forgotten ones there at times, but nonetheless important.
Yeah.
Even small ports serve a big purpose. So
that's right. That's right. And then more recently, you sit with NOAA, National, Atmospheric and help me out with it. I know I used to know that.
I used
Don't
to
put
know
you on
it
the spot.
National
I got a
Oceanic Administrative.
Administrative. A good friend of mine, I do a lot of technical wreck diving with. It works for NOAA over in St. Petersburg, and cool organization, definitely one of the good ones. But you're as an industry advisory committee member.
Yes.
That's cool. And of course, you're also a Lady Gator.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Go Gators.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that school. So welcome back.
Thank you.
So everybody kind of gets to know a little bit of who Laura is here. But what I like talking about is I'm a Florida boy, and I've had all my businesses based here in the state of Florida. I've had a nice run of almost 40 years doing business in and around the state of Florida and worldwide, but everybody that knows me knows that Florida is my home base. I grew up in the St. Petersburg area, graduated from Seminole High School. Go Warhawks, and went to FIT, Florida Institute of Technology. At the time, it was in the Jensen Beach campus, so nice Florida school. The Gators said I could come, but I ended up just going that school instead. And then I started a couple manufacturing companies in Clearwater, and here I am now. So it's nice to have this conversation with somebody you're really more on the governmental side of things. You see it from a different set of lenses, so to speak, I think.
Yeah. Kind of a more holistic lens, I like to say. So very few have a maritime background, I guess, that you could say that I have. So I like to say I've got a little bit of an edge because I see things from the maritime side too.
You're also a Lauderdale lady.
Yes, born and raised.
That's awesome.
I am a true Florida cracker.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
And so that brings there's some cool synergy. We have some things in common there. So those that know me and have listened and followed this podcast know that I'm a huge advocate for shipbuilding, yacht building, manufacturing. I tell people that don't really understand the importance of manufacturing. It's really the only economic driver that creates real value. Services just share money, trades money back and forth. There's nothing that really enhances the value of that dollar. It's simply you're trading services for money. Manufacturing is really the only discipline that adds value. You buy a raw material and you hire a person, and that person takes a paycheck, and that paycheck goes back into the community and living and everything that happens. The raw material that you bought for $1 goes into a product, and at the end of the day, that product sells for $20. And there you've seen the value increase of both the labor and the materials and all of the overhead and everything that happens in that business. And that is how our country became wealthy back in the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And unfortunately, I talk a lot about how over the last couple of decades, we've lost so much of that manufacturing, particular boat building, shipbuilding in the United States. I paid attention to the yacht building, and I tell people when I got into it, there was over 45 shipyards in North America, that's US and Canada, building crew-served yachts that would have been 75, 80 foot and larger, and 5 left maybe. So we've seen a lot. Come to find out that when we look at our US shipbuilding, we're a fraction of what we once were. And I think right now the stats are we're putting out like 80 ships a year compared to China's putting out 5,500 ships a year. Wow. Talk about a disparity.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of exported our manufacturing, and now we're paying a price for that because things are expensive and we don't have that manufacturing discipline like we used to have it. So one of the things that I think this conversation is setting up for is talking about bringing it back and what it could look like and how we do that. And we can't do it without some help from the state or states, potentially even the federal government. And we'll go down that rabbit hole a little bit, I think.
I'm game.
Good, love it. The first thing I thought I'd put on the table, and maybe I'll do this too, through my consultancy company, I've been asked to participate in the idea of starting a new yacht building company here in the United States. If we're successful, it'll be the first one started in the last almost 20 years probably. And so in the process, we're right now in the process of the feasibility piece of it. And we're looking at the potential of building these vessels either in Georgia or Florida, or a little bit of both maybe. But we've identified that the southeast part of the United States seems to be the most economically friendly, business-friendly place to do it right now.
True.
So again, that's adding a little context here. I can't talk much more about it than that because of some agreements we've made within the organization to kind of not talk about it too much. But we're hopeful that we'll be successful. And again, that speaks to that whole idea of seeing yacht building and shipbuilding coming back to the United States. Thrilled to be participating at some level with doing that. Let's take a look at Fort Pierce, Florida. And the reason I pick out Fort Pierce is because it is in a historically economically depressed area, I think, a little bit. It's right up the coast from where we are here right now in Fort Lauderdale, and it's kind of central to the state. It has port facilities, so it has the infrastructure of shipping. It's not that far from railway lines. It's not horribly far from international airports. There's both the Florida Turnpike and I-95 going right by, so you've got trucking and interstate highways and the ability to move freight in and out. So it's not a bad place for manufacturing. There's a population, it's not a large population, but almost 500,000 people live in that area. It's got educational resources. So, the St. Lucie Public Schools have career and technical education courses there. There's some apprenticeship courses there. So I think the foundation is there. There's also a company by the name of Director Shipyards that has set up operations. So from my perspective, it's got a footprint. How does the state help promote program like this? The local government, state government, a little combination of both? What, based on what you know, how do we help the local maritime industry there?
It is a combination of both, a combination of all three. I'd say I'd throw federal into that mix too, because it's very much layered, but there's a common saying that we say amongst the economic development community, and that is economic development is all local. The locals have to want it first. And and the policies and the drive and the initiative needs to be driven at the local level. And what do I mean by that? Fort Pierce, definitely not taking anything away from St. Lucie County because they're doing very well in certain parts. But in other parts of the county, they've more traditionally in favor of a lot of economic development. That's changed in recent years.
Okay.
So since director came in and in the years after that, I think director's been there for about 5 years now. But the want for economic development and the policies driven towards encouraging it are very much present there. And when that's in place, then, things kind of fall into place. So the state comes in, they invest money in career and technical programs at Indian River State College that is close by there. If a company is looking, and in fact, there were many when I was, with the state as well, we would obviously take a very sincere analysis of what this company is supposed to do. And there was plenty of manufacturing that was looking to descend upon that area, related to maritime and not otherwise. But either way, being able to assist in whatever way we can, be it with tax credits or, some sort of incentives, towards infrastructure or workforce or whatever it is. Right. So that's the state, how the state kind of comes in and supports it. And then you have working with the federal government if they're involved, in facilitating the whole process. So we, the state, act as a liaison to all involved in order to effectuate a deal and make it happen.
Gotcha. So if I was XYZ company and I looked at that area and I thought, well, I believe in what's being done right there, and I've got product or services that can support a business like Director Shipyard, what's the outlook to come in there and hang a shingle? It's going to be a welcome mat put out, and
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so, yes. And I would say 99.9% of the time the answer is yes. The communication is key. Speaking, being connected with, how you make the connection is varied. You come through the state or you come through the local community, either way, everybody will be brought to the table. There's no correct way to start the conversation, but the most quintessential part of the conversation is the communication and being upfront with the plans and very open so that nobody is driving the narrative instead of you.
Right.
So, we don't have to play games here. There's plenty of people that don't want what we offer. When I say we, maritime, or just economic development in general. So
interesting.
It's important that you get out in front of any sort of false narratives that might come out about what you're looking to do, so that you don't get a potential blowback at the local community level that could prevent you from doing what you want to do.
Does that come from ignorance, naivete, or just conflicting?
All of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Okay.
It's it's a fear of change. There's many, like myself, that grew up in these communities, and they like them the way they are. So, whereas there's others that, grew up there and want to see more jobs, so it really depends, what it is. And there are, unfortunately, other agendas at play, and it's a challenge, but it's not a challenge that cannot be overcome. It's just it's part of the discussion and part of the politics around getting this industry to the table.
Well, what I've observed over the last number of years, and I went to college just a little south of there, and so I spent a lot of time in that part of the world. And Fort Pierce had a reputation as being somewhat impoverished and a lot of crime. And what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is more of a gentrification. The downtown area has been really turned around nicely.
Yeah.
And, I think some of the poverty is being addressed with the jobs and all. So, I think there's a strong argument for the development or redevelopment of those areas and bringing in industry.
Mm-hmm.
I just spent last week up in Savannah, Georgia. The USSA, the United States Super Yacht Association, just hosted an event up there to put a spotlight on Savannah, Georgia. And I have to tell you, my takeaway was it was an exceptional experience. And certainly that would be a destination that I would advocate, even though it's not in Florida, just because of what I saw there. And so after leaving Savannah and driving back home, thinking about the experience I had last week, it was like, what they're doing there is replicable. So for instance, IGY Marinas has just opened one of the first marina facilities in years, and it's on the Savannah River, just opposite really of where the big shipyard is, with a 96 slip marina and a face stock 1,200 feet long with 65 feet of water at low tide that can dock just about any yacht.
That's amazing.
Built.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
Now, there wasn't a single boat there because they just were waiting for CO, but that really gave you the eye to see what's potential there, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting, the takeaway there is the synergy, because right up the river from there is the Savannah Yachting Center, owned by Safe Harbors Marinas, recently acquired by Blackstone. So they're undergoing their own reinvention, but they're able to, they have a graving dock that's a little over 400 feet long, 450 feet long. So they can put almost any size ship or yacht in the graving dock. They've got a marine lift that picks up, I think, 3,200 tons. They can put up to 9 large yachts on the hard to be serviced and refit at any given time. And their biggest problem had been, where do you put the boats that are waiting to come in or coming out, or where do you put the tenders that are coming off these boats for 6 months at a time? And so IGY, right down the river, has created a synergetic relationship where the vessels that are waiting to come in or just coming out of that yard can tie up and spend some time. The tenders, these are, 25 to 35, 40 foot, sometimes 50 foot small boats that accompany these large yachts, can go into that marina. So that's working together. I'm familiar with, for instance, there's a company that happens to also sponsor my podcast who has got facilities they set up there. So Tom McGowan of Engineered Yachting Solutions saw what was going on up there and hung a shingle and has put his company or location for his company there. And that's the beauty, I think, of when you see these complementing businesses coming together for a purpose. And that's what I look at places like Fort Pierce and others in the state of Florida saying, if we are successful, that's what happens.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer we can do so much here, and to be fair, I'm geographically agnostic now. Of course, my deference is to Florida more often than not.
Right.
But under my newer hat, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
like I'm more or less the entire U.S. So I'm happy to see this go anywhere.
Bravo.
And I wholeheartedly agree that Georgia would be a great spot.
Well, thank you for that, because that's part of the conversation right now. Yeah. And Georgia and Savannah in particular being looked at very hard as a location for building these yachts, which would be cool.
Yeah.
And again, same thing. And why? What we just talked about, the fact that there is so much infrastructure that's being attracted predominantly by Savannah Yachting Center. But then right down the river, there's also Thunderbolt Marine. It's another yacht refit area that can pool boats up to about 50 meters, 160, 170 feet.
Yeah.
Beautiful paint facilities. They've got in-house machine shop and welding and joiner work. They do some beautiful woodworking and joiner work in that shipyard. And it's owned by a gentleman that's very pro-yachting, who really wants to see that shipyard in the industry grow. So you have that local desire, to do that while preserving the culture and the beautiful historic downtown Savannah area as is.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of fun. And you go around the country and you see places like, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, in the dairy belt, that are building yachts, or you go out to the Pacific Northwest and you see that you have Westport Shipyards and Delta Marine in the Seattle area building. And there is some optimism that there still is a shipbuilding culture. Just it needs to be revitalized, and I think it needs to spotlights put on it.
100%. And let's be real. It needs to be subsidized.
It does.
It does.
It does. We subsidize so many things,
Yep.
and my goodness, we're quick to send money overseas to subsidize war, and we go through our own governmental economy, and we're finding all sorts of waste and fraud and money to be found. I'm a big proponent to sweep up some of that found, waste and turn it around into economic development, which I think would benefit everybody.
Exactly.
There is another program that I've been made aware of, and I think this would be important to pay attention to. It's definitely a rabbit hole to go down. It's the Shipbuilding and Harbor Infrastructure for Prosperity and Security, SHIPS, or Ships for America Act. Bravo. First of all, I got it all out, right? I got my cheat sheet. I don't always sit here with a cheat sheet during these interviews, these conversations, but today it was like, I want to get this stuff right. And for those who thought this was something that was just purely current federal administration's idea, it actually was introduced last year, bipartisan, with a lot of bipartisan support in Congress. And it has been reintroduced this past April with some enhancements. It aims to revitalize the U.S. maritime and shipbuilding industries to address national security, economic competitiveness, and workforce challenges. And it responds to the U.S.'s weakened maritime sector. And this is where I got these numbers, with only about 80 U.S. flagged vessels in international commerce compared to China's 5,500. Wow.
Mind blown. Yeah.
I know, it's crazy. So the Ships for America Act, that's what we're going to compress it down into something we can talk about and without having to take a breath. Love it. Love it. Is this a resource where we should and could start looking to find ways of bringing shipbuilding, not just yacht building, but shipbuilding back into Florida, back into the United States? How can we best take advantage of this mindset right now?
I mean, it's on the right path. Let's go ahead and say a lot of this is coming out of the gate now. So we're getting ready to understand, the real minutiae around the policy and like what it's truly going to look like from an impactful statement and how you can do that. But first and foremost is just simply having the platform and the support from the federal government that this is important is light years ahead of where we've been for many decades. So the need to have a full comprehensive maritime strategy has been something that people way smarter than me have been saying for a very long time. And this is the beginning of that. So taking maritime, the first industry that ever really existed.
That's true.
And making it the cornerstone of economic development moving forward and building everything around it.
Right.
So because it's not just, as we know, it's not just, and we learned this big time from the supply chain crisis, it's not just the waterfront activities that's incorporated within the whole maritime strategy. It's your warehousing, it's your rail, it's your trucks, it's everything that supports it. So take away the maritime, all of that doesn't operate,
No.
So it needs to be the focal aspect of this entire initiative, and it needs every resource thrown at it. And I'm not just saying money, it needs talent, it needs experts, it needs it needs everything.
Right.
And so we're doing an amazing amazing service to ourselves as a country to take this on head on now.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the start of this conversation. I think when we talk about manufacturing ships and yachts, I mean, that's the real deal. I mean, these ships are fabricated and put together by people. And that's a job that AI will never take. I don't care how evolved AI becomes, it can't strike a weld, it can't pull a wire, it takes craftsmanship, it takes people, the human piece of it. And the jobs, just alone with the jobs that will be created by getting shipyards back on their feet and hiring again and producing again. And who knows, maybe that drives more steel production in the United States and takes some of the import pressures off, because we can bring so much steel in from China and Korea and other places that it used to be produced right here in the good old US of A.
Right.
So in aluminum, same thing. That's also a resource and a commodity that could and should be produced here domestically. Looking at all of that, it transcends just the maritime piece of it. It filters down into the entire U.S. economy.
100%.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, that's something I think we should all be paying attention to. And when we can talk to the lobbyists and the people that we can connect to individually and corporately, we should.
Yeah, understanding how we can take these programs, which are slowly but surely being released, and how we'll be able to apply them to what may be a good fit for a future shipyard is really the most exciting part about this for me.
Me too. I've been wanting to see this my entire career. And, I just, watch what's happened over the last 40 years going, wow, how do we lose such a thing?
Yeah.
We were building, Liberty ships, so prolifically that, the Germans couldn't sink them fast enough to stop, and we've completely gone away from that. It's crazy. There's something else that I'm hearing about, which is Maritime Prosperity Zones. Now, that's not just a state of Florida thing, too. It's a national piece. It's not been enacted yet, but I think it goes hand in hand with the Ships for America Act. And that is essentially finding areas where we see a need or potential for creating these prosperity zones that will then attract funding and support federally and statewide as well.
Yeah, it's like an opportunity zone for maritime.
Right.
That's what I like to call it.
Yeah.
Without knowing entirely what it is, but that's what it sounds like to me.
Well, it's a work in process apparently, but it's moving in the right direction. I hadn't heard about that ever.
Yeah.
So no, that's really kind of cool. And then, we look for state and federal incentives for, trying to transform Florida and other places for yacht and shipbuilding. You and I talked a little bit ago about the Florida Job Growth Grant Fund. It's not a lot of money when, in the grand scheme of things, talking about $50 million for infrastructure and workforce training, up to $10 million per project. But still, that's enough money to kickstart things or to,
It support that in tandem with so many others. I mean, the incentive discussion is always interesting because there's no one size fits all project that you can say, oh, that'll work for it. This will work for it without knowing really the granular details around it. So where I'm going with this is that, yes, Job Growth Grant Fund is one of many incentives, but we have so many incentives that aren't even labeled incentives that we could use or have used towards maritime related projects. I can tell you one in particular, which is very relevant to this discussion. When I was secretary, we announced the BAE shiplift expansion in Jacksonville.
Right.
Yeah, they're about to do their ribbon cutting in June.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, on June 2nd. So they actually, which is really nice, they invited me back for it. So even though I'm long gone, they said, can you come back? Can you come back? Because you were there when we announced. And
Love it.
I was like, I'd be honored, to go. So I'm looking forward to that. But what we did there, which was very interesting. So Space Florida, you think like, why are you talking about space? We're talking about something, talking about maritime, because what was being built on those ships, because those were Navy ships, with aerospace, or aviation related activities being launched from some of the ships that would be using this new shiplift facility, the naval vessels. We were able to use an incentive that is only commonly used for aerospace and defense projects. Well, there you have an aerospace and defense project. If you really want to look at it, from a different angle,
Sure.
in order for this to all pencil out for BAE to do this expansion in Florida, we leveraged that particular incentive through Space Florida to ensure that they got where they needed to be. So it was an amazing deal.
That's a beautiful thing.
Deal. Yeah.
BAE is another one of those shipyards that had a little crossover from mostly Navy. But they also did yacht service and refit work. And, that was kind of interesting, just like Tampa Ship over in Tampa does.
Yeah.
Edison Schwest owns Tampa Shipyards. And most of that is commercial work, but they do bring in a lot of large yachts. And it's not well known that they offer those services.
Yeah.
You just touched on something interesting, though. There was this little company called SpaceX.
Never heard of that.
You've never heard of Mr. Musk either, and the Starlink systems and everything that makes everything so uniquely different than the world you and I grew up in way back when. But I was blown away when I realized the number of spacecraft that are being launched off of our coast every year. And then I start understanding that there's a number of very purpose-built ships and barges that are utilized in the launch process, the retrieval, crazy stuff that they're doing. And you realize all of a sudden that this aerospace technology has a direct and significant impact on the maritime space and the technologies we're having to develop to support the aerospace technologies. Now, that's a win-win if I've ever heard one.
We are a quad modal state here in the state of Florida. Quad modal. So we're not only dealing with, rail, sea, and road, we're also dealing with space and the intersection of all four. And when it comes to economic development. So it's a new paradigm. It's a complete paradigm shift. When you talk to the Florida Department of Transportation, having to factor in how space influences and interacts with all these different modes, it's a very fun conversation.
Isn't it though?
But we've basically had to create the roadmap around that, so that other states are clearly benefiting from too, just Texas in particular, in California, obviously. But yeah, we like to say that we started it.
Of course we did. We got us to the moon.
Yeah.
And, it's this fun fact about the state of Florida. And the reason why this happens here and not many other places is that we have this space coast, this area, Merritt Island there on the east coast of Florida. You pay attention, all of these spacecraft always get launched to the east. And the reason they get launched to the east is the Earth rotates to the east. So they get a leg up. They get the rotational effect of the Earth to help in the launch of the spacecraft. And of course, they're now being launched over the ocean.
Yeah.
So used to be, they just drop those booster rockets and they just become, ocean debris in the bottom of the ocean. Now Musk has figured out how to retrieve them, let them fly back and land, and we're recycling things, and it's making space travel more affordable and more mainstream. But the point is, Florida will always have that because where we are.
Right.
It's the best place. It's the perfect location for launching spacecraft.
Right. We had 94, I think it was. We had a record. Obviously, it's a record every year. We break the record every year, but it was 94 launches last year, and we'll have well over 100 this year, probably close to 125, 150.
That's crazy. I love it.
The desire, though, is to have in the many hundreds in just the next couple of years. So from an infrastructure standpoint,
one a day type of thing. Almost.
Yeah, well, we're averaging 2 a week now. So, but we're, when you think about doubling or nearly tripling that number, you can only imagine the infrastructure demands that we're going to have here in order to prepare for that. Right. So, yeah.
And if you've never come to Florida to watch a spacecraft take off, no excuse now not to, because it is amazing to be there, in close proximity to these launch sites, and you watch these spacecraft taking off over the ocean. The visual is amazing. The audio, you hear the power of those rocket engines. It's just like crazy. And it's an experience not to be missed. So,
not at all.
And now you can plan your Florida vacation and almost certainly build that into your itinerary. You're almost certainly likely going to be able to see one.
Yeah. What's funny about it is that, you see the pictures of the launches and you see people at the beach, hanging out. Yeah. They're so common now that everybody's just...
They don't even pay attention to them
anymore. You see people on the beach, they're not like, there's a rocket in the background. Only a few people are looking at it. It's just like, it's another rocket.
Maybe Musk's got to let one or two blow up occasionally just to keep everybody's attention.
The way he tests things, I'm sure we'll get them.
Yeah, don't put that in the universe too much.
Yeah.
I love that. So I guess I should talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And, that is the tariffs that have been going on. And, sitting in the space I sit in, I've had people from all over the world make comments. And I've had a few people say, Rick, you should do a show just on the tariffs. And I will come straight out and say, I employ Rick's rule in this. And Rick's rule is simply stated that when anything of significance comes on the scene, shut up, sit back, and watch. Because people way smarter than me are at play here, and I don't pretend to know what the end game is or what the final outcome will be, but we are definitely dealing now with a different world. You can speak to this. You've seen what's happened in the ports. We're seeing fewer ships coming in, a little less cargo coming in. So there is a current short-term economic impact, no doubt.
Well, you also saw, to be fair, and probably everybody could tell where I feel in this by the time we're done with this conversation. But to be fair, there was a lot of front loading of activity ahead of these tariffs, because the awareness that they were coming.
Right.
So things are a little lighter now.
This wasn't like a big surprise.
I think there was enough preparation ahead of this. I mean, now granted, some of the figures a bit more than perhaps people were anticipating, sure. But like, I appreciate Rick's rule. And like Rick, I think this is a little bit of a wait and see game. This is just how Trump negotiates. He's a grenade thrower and he likes to rattle everyone's cages. And then that's what brings everybody to the table, and then deals are signed. He's always doing deals, and this is just more of the same. So, we're only a couple weeks, are we, into this? And I think in not too long of a time, we'll see things shake out as they should. So that's one aspect of it. Second is, I was in local economic development during Trump's first term in Nassau County. That's when I was port director as well. So 2 hats.
Top right-hand corner of the state,
Top right-hand corner of the state, north of Jacksonville. So we had one of the few mega sites in the state of Florida that could support very large scale manufacturing. So 10 million square feet is what we could have built there, like the size of a Tesla plant.
Wow.
Battery plant, which is what we could have put there. I saw firsthand what these tariff discussions were doing when it came to onshoring discussions, to here in the United States, but then obviously in my own backyard, here in Florida. Right. So for those that like to say this isn't going to encourage the tariff discussions, tariff threats, any of that is not going to encourage that activity, I think is false, because I saw it firsthand. But back then it was a little bit different. It was, tariffs on solar panels and washing machines, now it's completely different. It's just clear across the board, numbers. So it could be pretty much anything, but I'm still involved very much in economic development in the state and local areas. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the activity, because this is forcing the hand of many manufacturers to rethink their supply chain and, call it maybe just posturing right now, but at least it is driving conversations. So I'm not completely against what's going on. Let me just go ahead and say that.
Well, thank you, Laura. You and I share that in common. I come from a background of manufacturing. And so I understand, first of all, the economics of manufacturing. And so you have a supply chain. We've seen the stress of our supply chain during COVID and what that did, and our reliance on so many materials predominantly coming out of China, which is its own conversation. And I don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole too deep right now, because we could be lost for hours.
You don't have enough battery for that.
Exactly. But I would tell you that when you look at the cost of an individual component as it relates to the total bill of materials of a piece of equipment that's being manufactured, a piece of anything, if it's related to actually what we're manufacturing here in the United States, the impact's probably small. On the other side of the coin, if you're going out to China and having them build the entire thing, which means you sent all your jobs over there that would have otherwise been here anyway to do it, and you're just bringing in a finished product with all the materials sourced in China, all the labor sourced in China, and then packaged and brought over here, and you just take it out of the shipping container and put it on the shelf, it's different. I would say that, for instance, in the yacht building industry, so much of what we do here locally is local materials, but I also watched, for instance, and our company was guilty of it too, some of the stainless steel components, like the Brightwork hooks and some of the hardware started being manufactured in China, and the cost was enough incentive to say, okay, we'll buy it there rather than locally. And then pretty soon you couldn't buy it locally because they couldn't stay in business. And all that stuff came out of China. Love to see that switch around, and it probably should switch around, because that's what this is all about. I speak for a living, right? Reciprocal nature of these tariffs that are being proposed right now, I think, is what makes sense. Yeah. So if country XYZ is charging us 30% tariff, the current administration is saying, okay, then we're going to charge you 30% tariff. They come back to the table and say, oh, well, in that case, maybe we'll just charge you 10% tariff, then fine, it's 10%. I don't know how anybody anywhere in the world wouldn't look at that and say that's fair, particularly when you looked at what's been historically over the last several decades, the disparity in the economics of our importing, exporting. We are definitely importing way more product than we've been exporting. And it used to be the other way around. Our country became prosperous in the early 20th century, late 19th century, because of our economic engine, our ability to manufacture and export. And that's a big part of what built our prosperity. And we've seen that go away. And I think we're, hopefully, this is where the long view comes in, on track to see that eventually turn around. But it takes time. It takes time. It took a long time to lose it. It's going to take some time to get it back.
Yeah, and it's short-term pain for long-term gain. And I hope that the short-term pain is going to be just that.
Yeah, yeah. And it goes back to what we started this conversation on. I'm aware of a couple shipyards, actually a friend of mine that's well known and respected in the industry, but has asked for anonymity, called me a couple of weeks ago and said, Rick, in this 1 week, I got 5 phone calls from 5 shipyards, 3 in Europe, 1 in Brazil, and 1 in China, all asking about property availability to set up operation in the United States. Absolutely. And that was 5 in 1 week.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of a couple companies in Italy, so they're likely those 2 are part of the 3 European, that are actively getting ready to set up operations here in the United States. So, you take that and add to that the program that I'm currently trying to co-develop with other partners in this yacht manufacturing program. And where we were starting the conversation saying, well, we were at 45 a few decades ago down to maybe 5. Well, right now, possibly we could be doubling the size of our manufacturing from 5 to 10 in the next maybe 5 or 10 years because of these policies and economic, programs that will enhance and encourage shipbuilding, yacht building to come back to the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a win.
It's exciting.
That's a
win. Yeah.
I want to wrap up with one other piece. We didn't talk about this, but I'm sure you could get your head around this a little bit. It's certainly not a gotcha moment at all.
That's okay.
But I interviewed a young woman by the name of Kato Fallon about a month and a half ago. She heads up the Marine Research Hub, which is part of the MIASF, Marine Industries Association of South Florida, with Phil Purcell. And actually, she has now joined Yachting International Radio, congratulations, Kate, with her own podcast, talking about the blue economy. And the synopsis of this, it comes down to just this: the opportunities in the blue economy for the future worldwide, $3 trillion and 40 million jobs by 2030. That's only 5 years from now. And so I throw this out as, how does that factor in the concept of our own economies? The blue economy is basically everything related to maritime.
Sure.
And it could be from coral restorations and things that are happening with Port Everglades and the expansion of Port Everglades. I think there's 2 million corals that have to be cultivated and replanted to...
Yeah, 1 or 2, something like that. The number's gone up, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. But no one company can do that. That's probably going to be a half a dozen or a dozen companies in the space of farming coral to be able to do this over the next few years. And that's just an example of what the blue economy looks like. And of course, everything we talked about this afternoon falls into that same category. Building ships, building yachts, the jobs that follow that, and all of that. So in your view, in the developmental organizations you've been part of, do you see that?
Oh gosh, yeah. So it's a wonderful question actually. So I was vice chair, at times acting chair for the Florida Ocean Alliance for a while. This is when I was with the Harbor Pilots, and the MIASF was one of the members of the of the firm, and not the firm, I'm sorry, of the organization. But also we took the blue economy and looked at it holistically. So we had everyone at the table there. We had the seaports, we had Moat Maritime, we had the research institutions, we had the industry players, we had the environmental groups, we had everybody at the table working collectively for the greater good of the blue economy, the fisheries, everyone was there,
right? Because
we all share this one resource, but we all care about it differently. So we tried to, just recognize everyone's interests and participate, as a whole, all rowing in the same direction, protecting, our most precious resource, but at the same time, leveraging it to its fullest extent to make it a very viable economic engine.
Say sustainable.
There you go. So it was a wonderful organization, still in existence today, and it's a wonderful model that we have here in the state of Florida that we could enhance so much more for the purpose of all that's related to our economy, because we have so much coastline that benefits everyone so much different, in so many different ways.
Wow.
So it's a model that is not only exists, it's being leveraged, and I hope leveraged even more, because it's so critical to how we have to look at things.
Yeah. No, I'm in total agreement with that. And it's just, I guess if in my world, it kind of drops into that category of fun fact, that we're working in this space. We all have our own agendas. We only know the part that we're working in. So when you step out and you look at with a big view and you start seeing numbers, that are in the trillions and jobs in the millions, it's like, wow, that's real, isn't it? Yeah. And of course, this whole planet exists because of our oceans, and without them, none of what we do is possible. So, at some level, the blue economy is attached to the entire worldwide economy at a very, high level.
Yeah.
So
and the collaboration is needed.
It is.
We operate too much in silo. We need to collaborate
right.
in a holistic fashion in order to really get ahead, because we're too busy fighting each other for things where we realize we all really want the same thing.
We all have our own individual agendas sometimes. And yeah. So maybe it's just when we become a little older and a little grayer, we become a little more wise and we start seeing things differently. I know I look at things much differently now than what I did when I started my businesses and, was early in the industry. And, and so it's kind of fun now to look at it and say, yeah, here we are. Mm-hmm. And, it's the future, it looks bright in spite of everything else that we kind of get thrown our way. It's still a good time to be in this business and a lot to look forward to, I think.
It's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, Laura, I look forward to the next opportunity you and I have to sit and continue this conversation. This one's fun. The last one was a lot of fun. I learn a lot when I talk to you. You make me do my homework, and that's part of it.
You're welcome, I guess.
No, but I love your reinvention. I've gone through some reinvention in my world, and you've gone through some reinvention in your world. Isn't that great?
I mean, is, yeah.
It's scary at times, but boy, what you achieve and, what the personal growth that comes from that is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, change is good.
Change is good, absolutely.
Embrace it. It's
Embrace it, own it, for sure, for sure. I'm a living example of that, for sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, thank you very much. You've been generous with your time.
My
I know
pleasure.
you were busy. You got a lot on your plate over the next couple of weeks.
Never too busy for you.
You're a darling. I appreciate that. Don't forget, Grok 3, ChatGPT.
Saves time.
Help you get to the next couple of weeks here.
Yes.
No, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, until the next time, thanks again, and I'm out of here.